for the Durham Special Needs Advisory Council. We would like to thank you for joining the DPS Exceptional Children's Department and Durham Special Needs Advisory Council on our second of 3 informational sessions regarding the transition process for students with disabilities and IEPs. We hope that you will obtain the knowledge you will need to advocate for the best possible educational experience for your child. However, unfortunately, we will not have a live translation in Spanish tonight, but we will have this event translated later, and it will be posted on the DPS website. At this point, I will turn things over to our moderator for the hour, Ms. Crystal Roberts.
Good evening, everyone. We are so happy to have you back again. For those who have participated in the first webinar that was provided by the EC department and DSNAC, we had a fabulous conversation, and this is the second in a series, as Ms. Porter said, understanding the continuum of EC services and the placement process. So we hope that you will be able to take away some relevant, useful information. I'm sure that you will. I work for Durham Public Schools as the communications specialist in the Office of Public Affairs, and you have the best before you. So you will take away some wonderful information. And we'll just get right into the conversation tonight. There are some questions that I would like to pose to this August panel here. But before we start, I'd like to ask that each of them introduce themselves. And I feel like the Brady Bunch here because, you know, right under me is Wendy Vevrusek. Then we have Dr. Kristen Bell and we have Ms. Tracy Hawkins. We'll start with you, Wendy.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Wendy Vevrusek, and I serve as the Elementary Exceptional Children's Director for Durham Public Schools.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Bell, and I am the Executive Director for the Exceptional Children's Department here in Durham Public Schools.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Hawkins, and I am a parent of 2 kids, one of which is in Durham Public Schools Exceptional Program.
Good evening. My name is Stacy Burns, and I am the EC Director serving all middle and high schools.
Stacy, I'm sorry you weren't in the Brady Bunch grid.
It's okay.
Your name is there. So thank you all for being here and for bringing your A game in terms of some information for our listeners tonight and our viewers. We're going to start with Dr. Bell. We're going to put Dr. Bell on the hot seat here with our first question. You'll start us out. We're going to start with the overarching question. And that is, what is the continuum of EC services and how is that determined for a student? Dr. Bell, that's part A. Part B is who makes the decision and why?
Yeah, wow, we're just kicking it off with the hard ones right away, huh? All right, I'll take my best stab at it and let my teammates jump in when I leave something out or need clarification. So the continuum of EC services applies to students who have individualized education programs, IEPs, right? They've been found eligible and in need of special education or what we call exceptional children's services. And the IEP team, every child has an IEP team. There are certain required people to be on the IEP team, parent, a general education teacher, the special education teacher, an LEA representative, that's usually a school administrator, or in Durham, our EC facilitators. A lot of other people could also serve on the team depending on that student's needs. So that team gets together and based on all the information about that child to determine what their services are going to be based on their needs and where they will receive those services. So that's what the continuum is like every district has an obligation to provide a range of services so that we can meet the needs of all the students. So less restrictive, least restrictive. We usually start with just services in the regular education program, the general education program. And that's where all of our conversations should start for every student. That's least restrictive. Can we provide those services there? Can we implement those goals and objectives in that setting with the EC teacher or specialist coming in? And then we move along the continuum to sometimes students need to be served in a resource room or what we call pullout. The EC classroom might be a space that the teacher has where they might pull out small groups of students to work on specific skills. And then we also have an obligation if students need even more restrictive special classes, what we call in Durham Public Schools EC special programs. You might also have heard of them called self-contained or separate. We like to call them EC special programs because that's what they are. They're specialized for students, specifically for students with disabilities, where they can get really intensive services based on their IEP. And then we have even more restrictive. Some students might need, some districts have special schools. We do not in Durham. I think that's a great thing that all of our students are served in our DPS schools. But we may have students who may need hospital or homebound services, right? Which is even more restrictive because think of homebound services could be the teacher going into the student's home or meeting at a neutral site because there could be some reason the student can't physically come to the school site. And that becomes more restrictive because the more that you're removed from your non-disabled peers, the more restrictive that setting becomes. And it just has to be individualized based on the student's needs. And throughout the school day, that location of services can change. The IEP team might determine that certain services or parts of instruction can be provided in the general ed classroom with the teacher pushing in, or maybe just through accommodations and supports. But there are other parts of the student's day where they need to work with the resource teacher in a pull-out small group setting. Some students with more significant or complex needs may need more of their day where they're removed and get really small group intensive services. So it's really about being fluid with how we meet the needs of students. And the key thing for parents to know is that it has to be individualized, right? We would never say that because your student has an IEP and they're identified as autistic or a specific disability, they're going to be served here. That never should be said. It's never based on an eligibility area. It's never based on any specific scores. It's based on what that team, including you as a parent, determines is least restrictive environment. And I want to say that because I'll probably say it a couple of times throughout this session. Least restrictive environment is one of the main foundations of our work. That means we have to make sure that we're serving all of our students with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. And that means we have to consider providing supports within the regular classroom first before we start removing students and say they can't get their services in the general classroom. And that's just really important for a parent to remember, because if you're in an IEP meeting, to be able to ask questions about that. If the team is proposing some removal, making sure that you're really clear on why that is. And did they consider the regular classroom, the general education grade level classroom first? So just, I guess the second part of that question is like, who makes the decision? Like I said, it's the IEP team. And as a parent, you should always be a part of that IEP team. Your input is critical. And it should be based on a lot of data around your child's needs. And there's a specific process of going through the IEP, like establishing what the strengths and needs are, what supports are needed before you get to usually at the very end of the IEP where you're talking about, now we've identified clearly what this child needs. How are we going to deliver that? Like that's the culmination of the IEP in a sense at the end. Where do we provide these services that we just identified that the student needs? And I'm going to tag over to Stacy or Wendy to see if they would add anything to those comments.
I think that was pretty thorough, but I think that we will touch on this again before this night is over.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bell, Stacy, Wendy. I heard you say individualized at least twice, maybe 3 or 4 times, least restrictive and team. Love that, because the fact of the matter is that you have the knowledge and the information, but the parent is and the student are center. Would you agree with that, Tracy?
Absolutely. I would say that was the thing going into the EC program, that I really didn't understand the role of the parent and how powerful my role as a parent was until it was really the DPS EC team that really empowered me to let me know, like, well, you hold the cards. Like if you feel like something's not being met or the needs of your sons are not being met, then you call us together. Like you don't have to wait on us to do our annual transition meeting or whenever the date is that it rolls around for everyone to come together and kind reassess the IEP, I felt like initially I was waiting for that before I can make any changes until I found out otherwise.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much for adding to that conversation. We have a second question we'd like to pose. And Ms. Porter, I want to share with you that I cannot see the chat room. I can't seem to get to the chat. So if there are other questions that I need to be aware of, please let me know. The second question we have is going to Krista Saunders and Wendy Vavrusek. How is the determination made whether a child is in a self-contained classroom versus general education? And then who makes this decision, and is the parent involved?
Well, I'm going to take that one. Ms. Saunders wasn't able to join us tonight, so I'll be fielding all the ones that she's listed for.
Thank you.
But I'm going to actually start with the second part of that. So the second part is, who makes the decision? And I think, as Dr. Bell tipped us off, anything to do with an IEP is going to be an IEP team decision. It is always the goal for any team to have consensus around decision making, right? We never want it to end up in a situation where we feel like some want it this way and some want it that way, or a parent only wants it this way and other team members want it this way. We really want to reach ultimate consensus amongst everybody at the table in how we're approaching decisions for whatever the question may be about. And we'll talk about what happens if that doesn't happen. If we don't have consensus, we'll touch on that later, but because that can occur. But in this stage, again, I'm going to refer back to kind of where Dr. Bell had originally started, which is we're always obligated legally. Every team is obligated to be looking at what is the least restrictive environment for that child. Now, that just doesn't mean we make those decisions based on what we think we want for the child or what we think is good for the child. We hope that we are making those decisions about what is good and what is right for the child because we have the data to tell us so. So that could be data that is certainly observational, but we also want to have very objective data, which can be driven from formal evaluations, progress monitoring of students' IEP goals and objectives, et cetera. And so again, starting with that least restrictive environment, that doesn't always look the same for every kid, right? It is called an individualized education program. So some students' least restrictive environment might start with them being supported in their general education classroom by a special education teacher once a day for 30 minutes. But another student's least restrictive environment might mean that they are coming out of their general education classroom for maybe a couple hours a day. And then for some of those students, as Dr. Bell was alluding, that their needs are substantial and that they need more of their time primarily spent with special education specialists and teachers. And they are then in more of a special program type setting. And maybe they are going out, but they're going out with other adult support to participate with their non-disabled peers. But again, all of those decisions are going to should be data driven. And should reach consensus based on where you're starting, where you've been, and what information you have along that path.
Thank you so very much. It's great to hear that least restrictive is the priority. Data-driven, objective data. That to me, as a parent, that's very important. And you mentioned, Wendy, the special programs. And so this next question is for you as well. If my child needs a special program, does that mean that they stay there for all of their education?
Well, for at least I think everybody on this call, that is not our goal. We every year a team is charged with looking at all of the data, at least annually. And as Ms. Hawkins was alluding to, we should be, if there's reasons to meet before then, we should be meeting that because a parent feels they need to, because an EC teacher has collected some data that's telling us that we need to realign the points of where we're going. maybe change and amend the IEP for something based on the information that's been collected at that point. So there are absolutely reasons why a team might need to come together more often than just that annual review, and should do so. But is always our goal that at every annual point or any point that the team is meeting, that we're always considering options of how the child is doing. And I've been in consultation with teams right now that they are seeing good progress from students who've been maybe in a special program, and they are moving that child out, and they are thinking strategically about where best to start moving that child back out and hopefully move that child to a resource level of service and not special programs. So there is definitely good work out there, but like if there's any families out there who feel like their child's not spending time out in general education, even if they're in a special program, it's okay to be asking, where is my child going and participating with their non-disabled peers? And if they say they're not right now, then we need to know it's okay to be asking why. And they should have data to tell you maybe why it's not appropriate at this time. There should be good discussion around those questions and feeling okay to be the advocate. That's what I would want every parent to understand is you, as a parent myself, right? They are our babies, and it is our job as parents to advocate for our kids. And you don't have to be the educators, but you know what you want for your child and what you want to see happen. And so it's a matter of trying to work that together. And maybe there is data as to why it may not be appropriate then, but then maybe the next question is, how do we make a plan for it to happen if now is not the right time?
If I could just add a couple of things. That was great, Wendy. I want to reiterate the importance for parents to know that if a child is in a special program, it's still IEP driven. That doesn't mean that the child's whole day is with that EC teacher. That's still the IEP team to determine what that child's day looks like, that they may get the core instruction from that EC teacher, but there should be really robust conversation about every opportunity that's appropriate with the right supports for that child to be with their non-disabled peers. And the second thing is, I don't want parents to feel like if my child needs a special program for their entire educational career, that's some kind of negative thing. It's not. I think there's a stigma, and it's hard for some parents to understand what that means, and that it is something different. My child's peers are in a different setting, and how is my child having access, and is that okay? And is my child getting everything that they need? Are they missing anything? But we have kids that have complex needs, and they will their entire life, and they may need in their educational career to be in that kind of supportive environment while they're with us. But like Wendy said, it's really critical that is being reviewed on a regular basis, because kids change and the context change. And we want to make sure that we're always getting it right as the needs of the child changes, and not just saying we're not rubber stamping anything ever.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Bell. We're going to go to Stacy now and ask a question about what happens if I don't agree with the placement decision for my child. And Tracy, I'm going to ask you to weigh in after Ms. Burns responds to that as well, given your lived experience. Okay.
So hopefully the disagreement is not because the IEP team did not consider the input from the parent. Hopefully it's not based on predetermination. So if a parent, and I want to just piggyback off of what Wendy and Dr. Bell said, it is a team decision. And you should definitely, as the team, walk through the continuum, starting with the least restrictive environment and looking at what accommodations, modifications, supplemental aids and services that the student needs to be able to make progress in the general ed setting alongside the non-disabled peers. And if that can't happen, then you move through the continuum. But it's data-driven and it's a robust conversation. And it should be happening at every IEP meeting, not just the one and done, and then we look at it again years down the line. So if you do not agree with the decision, you have due process rights. You can definitely file, and you should be getting a procedural safeguards, right? Your parental rights, you should receive that. And the team should let you know what your rights are. And then, you can file due process, which would lead to like mediation, which we would then come back to the table. Unless you waive your right for mediation, then it goes straight to due process. And then there's a stay put. The student then stays with whatever the previous IEP said. The student goes back to that educational setting until that can be resolved. We're hoping that it can be resolved and that we can talk through that. But you do have rights to, there are rights afforded to you, which is your due process rights, and that should be explained to you by your team.
I got to add to that. That was great, Stacy. I always like to reiterate the point that in Durham Public Schools, this team that you see here, we do a lot of that dispute resolution. That's a big part of what we do, not everything that we do. Like, we want parents, if you can't resolve something at the school level, to know who to contact at the district level, and that's us, to see how we can listen and find out what's going on, review, and see if there's anything we can do to help before things do get escalated to maybe you filing a state complaint or, but as Stacy said, that is your right, and it's our obligation to make sure that parents do know their rights, but we do everything we can to resolve things locally.
Thank you for that. And Tracy, let me just clarify what I said when I said I wanted you to jump in, because I don't know your story. I was not inferring that you had disagreed. I wanted you to weigh in because as a parent, having the lived experience of, experiencing the EC department, that there are parents who look to you, and I'm sure that you have advocated for or have provided information to other parents. So I just wanted you to weigh in from that perspective and any other perspective that you might want to share.
Thank you, Crystal. Yeah, I would say what Stacy said is right on point with making sure as a parent, you really read that handbook and the parental rights. That's very important. And it's also important, as Dr. Bell reiterated, to really make sure you're able to work with the team there at the school before escalating. I think as parents, I'll speak for myself, we have tendency that like these are our babies and these are, our flesh and our blood, and we hold so, near and dear to our hearts. And I think it's sometimes easy as a parent to want to kind of go straight to the top, but realizing that, there are processes in place and really allowing the processes to play itself out and to go through those proper chain of commands. And this is why it's so important to know that handbook, to know your rights as a parent, and be able to really, hopefully you can establish that rapport with your IEP team to really feel like if you do have a disagreement or about what is in the IEP, that you can, talk it out and work it out as a team. But if not, as Stacy said, there are other channels and kind of next steps that you can take as a parent.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that. That's good to hear. We're going to go back to Wendy and ask this question, Wendy. What types of services can a child obtain through EC programs, such as assistive technology evaluations, speech, OT, PT, and et cetera?
Get unmuted here. So in Durham, I would say one of the that worked for a couple systems. One of the things that in a system such as Durham, we have the ability to evaluate really all of the possibilities that could exist, right? In our own umbrella, we have access to things like visual impairment evaluations, deaf and hard of hearing impairments, assistive technology evaluations, audiology. So we have all of those things housed in Durham Public Schools. And so we have experts in all of those areas. What determines whether or not when the team meets, either for that initial evaluation conversation or a reevaluation, which we are required to do every 3 years when a student has been determined eligible for services, that team is talking about what evaluations are needed based on what we know about the child. So they would be having a very comprehensive conversation about if they're already identified, what is their current category of disability, what is the data that we believe we need now? Do we believe there's a different disability? Do we believe there's other needs? For example, students with autism don't all need assistive technology, but some do. Other disabilities do as well. So sometimes it's a question of maybe you don't do it right away, but maybe there comes a point where you're asking for it. So those teams would, again, that IEP team decision making comes into play here, where through that conversation, the team is discussing all of the needs that we know of based on the history of the child and the data collected. And sometimes parents present outside data to us, outside evaluations. We should be considering all of those things. And we may still need to do some things in-house. And then that drives what we request for the evaluations. Now, here's where I know that some of the things that I have seen or parents, I do want to delineate here that we do sometimes have outside evaluations like occupational therapy or physical therapy or speech language therapy. Because a private provider or community-based provider was had done that and has been or would be serving the child. An outside evaluation that says speech therapy or something might be helpful or useful or important does not automatically translate to under the umbrella of the educational realm. And so that's where we have to sometimes have conversations about the differences between services for medical purposes, it's coded for medical reasons versus educational. And so they are different criteria. And so teams can consider all of those things. We can look at eligibility and we can look at outside evaluations around that eligibility. But just because a student might be receiving something in the community does not necessarily translate automatically to receiving those services in the school setting. So again, the team is going to look at all of the child's needs and move forward with evaluating in the areas that they think is necessary to support the student educationally. And we'll consider any and all information that a parent might bring to the table from outside providers as well.
Thank you, Wendy. This is such a very thoughtful process. The next question that we have is the definition of a BIP, a behavior intervention plan. Looks like that's for you, Stacy. And then when and why are they done?
Okay, great. So a behavior intervention plan is so you have to first conduct a functional behavior assessment. So, and a functional behavior assessment is an assessment that the team, to include the parent, they come together and they look at the behavior and what is the cause of the behavior, possible cause of the behavior. Data is collected for a period of time, and then you come back and you review the results of that. And we collected some really good data, and then we determine what the function of that behavior is. And then we develop what the replacement behavior, we develop a replacement behavior. Then through the development of a behavior intervention plan. That plan is very detailed. It could include changing the environment, right, to prevent the behavior. It could be direct instruction on the behavior. Positive reinforcement, as well as consequences when they don't perform the behavior. So when I say consequences, nothing like a suspension, but like, what's the consequence that they receive? Like maybe not receiving a reward for that. But there's also check-ins that you can have with that. There's, like I said, the changing the environment around them, helping them with pre-taught strategies in order for them to perform the desired behavior. It's really what you're doing is setting the student up for success. And again, there's data collected on that as well. You can have IEP goals that go along with that behavior intervention plan. Data collection, and the team meets every 4 to 6 weeks to review that plan and to make sure that the plan is actually working. And if not, then you make those adjustments as well. There are pretty much two reasons that you would do a functional behavior assessment. And one is if you see a behavior that the team can't figure out why there's a behavior and that students receive negative like consequences, suspension, in school suspension, whatever, then you would do a functional behavior assessment to figure out what's the antecedent to the behavior. But then also if there's a manifestation determination and is found to be a manifestation of the student's disability, the team must do a functional behavior assessment. And then if applicable, develop a behavior intervention plan. And Wendy and Dr. Bell, please feel free to jump in if I missed anything.
I think the only thing that I would add to that, Stacey, no, I think the information is right on track. I think the important thing to know about a functional behavior assessment is it is specific to that child's environment. So if a child were to transfer to another school or be in another environment, we would want that existing behavior intervention plan obviously to go where that child is going and be utilized. However, it is possible that a team may need to conduct a new functional behavior assessment and collect data based on that new environment.
Thank you so much. And I think Tracy had wanted to weigh in on this question as well.
Yes, if I could, I would say this was something that I knew nothing about as a parent, and I wasn't informed about it until I think it was one of our physicians, because my son was having some real challenges within the school system, within his classroom, and I didn't even realize that that was an option that we had. So I really encourage parents to make sure, again, they understand the importance of doing, like Stacey said, that behavioral intervention plan, the functional behavior analysis before that, because it really helps to put some really nice kind of parameters in place and supports in place to help your child function throughout their day. The other point that I was going to add, I feel like I just lost my train of thought. Oh, this is where it's really important as a parent to make sure you're bringing in things that's happening within the home environment. And I think this was some of the feedback that we got from our IEP team is when the behaviors were occurring in school or in the classroom is really helping the school understand what you do within your household to, maybe reduce those behaviors and how can those be translated within a school setting. So it's really important for the families to bring in the strategies and skills that are being utilized in the home and see if some of those can also be incorporated within the school setting.
Great advice, Tracy. Thank you so much. Stacey, I'm going to go back to you because we have a question about a parent's desire perhaps to decide that they want to retain their child. So if a parent wants to retain their child in the current grade rather than moving them up, what is that process and who do they contact?
That's a really good question. And that's a question we typically face around May and June a lot. So one, that's not an IEP team decision to retain. Our goal with the IEP is the specially designed instruction that's meant for the student to make meaningful progress. If a parent would desire to have their child retained, they should reach out to the building principal and have that discussion there. One of the, I will tell you for when you get into high school, that looks a little different because high school is credit bound. So there's the retention, there's no retention. They move along, but they have to have credits to meet their graduation requirement. So that would definitely be a principal and parent decision, but we can definitely make sure that revisit the IEP to make sure that everything's in place for the child to be successful. That's one thing. We should always do that when even that question comes up. Let's make sure that we've done everything we needed to do, because it may be the parent not understanding that their child is making meaningful progress. And so they automatically want to go to retention. That may be an opportunity for the team to talk about progress, not necessarily retention. But again, when you get into high school, definitely there's the credit requirements, special programs. You can stay in school up until your 22nd birthday. Well, if you turn 21 after the school year begins, you can continue on in school for this entire school year. But then when you look at, like, there's OCS, so there's other requirements for that. So there's credit requirements. There's also community hours, school hours, and competitive employment. So there are specific things in high school that would prohibit, like, that retention, if you will. Middle school and elementary school, again, you want to revisit, make sure they're making meaningful progress, but then ultimately it's up to the principal at that point.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Meaningful progress. I like that. I'm going to, there aren't any questions that I need to address from current viewers, are there, at this point? There are?
Yes. There
Okay.
is one, there's one in the chat. Can you see that, Ms. Roberts?
I cannot.
So the writer writes, I'm in a different district right now, but could be transferring in. What do you do if your school refuses to make a plan to go back from 100% removed setting to some portion of general ed? He goes to lunch and recess. How would that impact a move to DPS? And so hopefully you guys can see that in the chat and maybe understand some of that language there.
Thank you so much, Ms. Porter.
Yeah, I can start off with that. I'd say, well, definitely come to Durham Public Schools. That's the first thing I'll say. Come to us. What we would do is first get all your child's records and review them, because wherever that IEP is coming from, it's still a legal document, right? So we'd want to look at all the evaluations and determine why that team made that decision. We would also want to have a transition meeting for your child coming into our district in whatever school he or she they would be coming to meet with that team to review those documents, especially if it's in state. If you're coming in from out of state, we would have to do a new evaluation, a new referral to see if the child meets eligibility in North Carolina. But there's always opportunity to review that if you feel like your child is being pulled out too much and removed too much, and you're feeling like your IEP team isn't hearing you. We would want to know that when you come to us to be able to share those concerns as your child transitions to us. And we can get some new data to reevaluate that, right? And figure out, is this are these appropriate services? Is this the least restrictive environment? And hear very deeply what your concerns are. So we wouldn't want your child's current IEP to impact any move to Durham Public Schools, but do know that we would have to initially accept that as the legal document, but would be very open to working with you and figuring out how we could create an IEP that hopefully, like Stacy and Wendy have said before, that we can build consensus with the contents and services.
Great question. We have another for Wendy. Wendy, what is the role of the exceptional children's facilitator? So when a parent is having an issue or a challenge, would they go to the EC facilitator, the principal, or someone else?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think and I'll allude to when we talk about I think Ms. Hawkins was reflecting on kind of that chain of command kind of concept. And so let's talk a little bit about, who do I reach out to? So at the point where a student is identified in the Exceptional Children's Program and has an IEP, that means they have what we term is a case manager, which is typically one of your child's EC teachers or the EC teacher. It depends. But it's usually going to be the teacher who's providing the primary special education. And there could be several people involved in your child's IEP. You could have a speech therapist, you could have an occupational therapist, but those are what we call related service providers. And so there will be a primary special education service that might be around social emotional skills, might be around reading or math or writing, might be adapted PE. But those are what we call primary. And then the related services are services that are needed to help support that primary special education. But your case manager is really going to be your first point of contact. So think of them as like your general education teacher. Miss Smith is your child's third grade teacher. You're going to have a Miss Jones or a Mr. Jones who's going to be an EC teacher, and they would be your contact for all things related to the IEP or anything related to your child's special needs. if you feel as though that case manager is not responsive to you or doesn't have the question, can't answer the questions that you need answered, then your next step is the exceptional children's facilitator. So in Durham, we have people in this role, and they usually have 2 schools assigned to them. This year they have a few more than that. We are looking for excellent leaders in our division. Sorry, I just had a shameless plug there. But they are there to help. Think of them as kind of the leader for the exceptional children's department in that building. And say they are there to help give guidance to the EC teachers, to help them with the paperwork and our ECAT system here in North Carolina. They are there to help provide input when a teacher is maybe developing the IEP and give feedback on the drafts. They're there to also maybe do walkthroughs and see what's happening instructionally in classrooms, in the exceptional children's classrooms. So they're there to kind of help give guidance and direction at the building level. Ultimately, the facilitator would be next in line, but ultimately what I'm going to say is at that building level, the principal is in charge of all things in that building. So if you ever feel like there's something that's just not right, either with the case manager, you're not getting resolution there, you're feeling dissatisfied at the facilitator level, you definitely want to go to the principal. They should always be involved in any concerns, or if you feel a need to have them present. We are working hard at having our administrators more present in IEP meetings. That's been an effort this year and will continue to be a push in Durham Public Schools. We want our building principals to be more equipped and understanding and knowledgeable about exceptional children's processes, expectations. They are in charge of all things within their building. So they are the ones who are what I call sometimes the key to the kingdom, as far as making sure things get done as they need to be. But at the end of the day, like if there's really something, I think as Dr. Bell was alluding to, our goal for myself, Ms. Burns, Ms. Saunders, and Dr. Bell, ultimately, it is our goal to help problem solve. So if there is dissatisfaction, we would love to be involved before we get to getting involved because the state has notified us of a state complaint. We would love to be involved in helping to problem solve that before going at that level. So I think, to speak to Ms. Hawkins's idea of, we understand you're passionate, as you should be. It's your child, it's your blood, and by blood, that it's a natural emotional connection. And we're going to do our best to help put everything on the table. And I would say that at least for the 4 of us, Dr. Bell, Stacy, and myself, and Ms. Saunders, we all bring different specialties to the table. And so we work together in a pretty amazing cohesive group and rally all those strengths and give input on cases across our district, whether they're elementary or secondary. So I would say that we would encourage folks to just reach out, start with your case manager, go to your facilitator if you need to, or have questions about what's happened in the process. But definitely all those school building people will know you better than we will, but we are here to help in the end.
Thank you so much. And I know this isn't true, but it's like you have a staff of tens of thousands with all of the work that you do on behalf of our students. So thank you so much. Dr. Bell, we have a question for you, and that is, what happens if my child does not receive the services that are included in their IEP? And what are comp services, and how can my child receive those?
Great question. If your child doesn't receive, it's a legal document.
Uh-oh.
Frozen.
Am I back?
Okay, there we go.
You're back.
I was just going to say my internet all of a sudden went unstable. So
Yes.
if I go out, Stacy and Wendy tag. So if the child doesn't receive what's in the IEP, we have a problem because it's a legal document. And if you feel that way as a parent, definitely, reach out to the school administrator and say, I don't think my child's getting the services, and we need, it's the burden of proof is on us to make sure that we're showing the parent that they are getting what they're supposed to be getting. There could be various factors about why that's happening. At the end of the day, that's not the concern of the parent, because it still remains our obligation to provide those services. Like for this year, we, having a vacancy at the school where there's no teacher and there's no sub, there could be a situation like that. That doesn't relieve us of our obligation to provide services, but there could be like a real issue there that we can't. That could lead to a situation where we've denied the provision of a free appropriate public education, FAPE, not intentionally, but because we did, we would probably owe what's called compensatory services, where that usually happens at our level, where we would analyze what was provided or not provided and should have been provided, and work with the school administrator to come up with an offer to the parent about, based on what was missed, here's how we would like to make up those missed services. And try to work with the parent on that. It gets tough though, because they can't be provided during the school day. So it's usually something that's offered either, right? The school day is already so long for so many kids, before school or after school or weekends or over the holidays or summer. So it's not a great situation to be in where we're offering and owing compensatory. But if it does happen, and as a parent, you feel that there has been missed services, please reach out to the school administrator so that they can investigate that and find out for sure if anything was missed, and what, and to what extent did it happen to an extent that resulted in a denial of FAPE? And if so, we need to be responsive.
Keep your mic on, Dr. Bell, because this next question is for you as well. And that question is, what happens if I'm told that my child no longer needs an IEP, and I believe that he or she does?
I have a situation right now with a parent that reached out to us with that very same scenario, and she might have submitted the question. A lot of different avenues that could take. Again, at the IEP table as a parent, we're hoping that the parents feel comfortable and included to meaningfully contribute to that decision. But like we've said earlier, sometimes we can't reach consensus. So if that meeting's ended, parents said everything that they needed to say, and they've been involved in that, and the team still says, look, we feel the child no longer is in need, we're exiting the student. Parent says, I don't agree. This is where we'd love you to reach out to our office as a first step, or if the school administrator hasn't been involved, to always, start at the school level, so that we could do a review and look into the documents and take a look at it. There's also an avenue, again, for those due process rights that parents have. Like if you can't resolve it at the local level, you can reach out to the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. They have a whole dispute resolution department that's really helpful, and let them know what's going on. And you could file a state complaint. You could ask for a facilitated IEP meeting. You could file due process, which essentially is litigation against the district. Again, I don't want any of those to happen, so it's hard for me to say it, but I also know I have to tell parents, this is your rights. We'd love to resolve it. It's also making sure that parents understand, there's a lot of anxiety sometimes if my child's received services and had that support, and then someone's telling me they're no longer going to have that. Have we done a good job to explain the progress that your child really has made, and what an awesome thing that is, that they no longer require special education? That's a good thing, right? It's also a good thing if they continue to need it, because we need to do what your child needs. And then if you're taking away that IEP and they struggle, what's going to happen to my child? What other supports are there? I think sometimes we have to do a better job of explaining that. Some students might need what's called a 504 plan, right, Stacy? Where they are still an identified disability or being perceived as having a disability, but it doesn't require an IEP. They may be eligible and need a 504 plan, which is a formal legal document support for mostly accommodations. Some students might need just some supports through we call in the last session the MTSS process of intervention from their classroom teacher or another interventionist at the school. But we've got to make sure that we're answering those questions of parents about, because that's really what I think the core of it is. If you're taking away this legal document of support that my child may have had for some time, what if they continue to struggle and now we don't have that? There are other supports and there are avenues for you to also dispute that.
And one thing I like to add, it has to be on current data. So it can't be an opinion, right? Or based on just he's doing well in all his classes, he doesn't need this anymore. So it just has to be based on good data.
Well, and I'll piggyback even on you, Stacy. It is our expectation that if a team, so to trigger a potential exit from services means that an IEP team should have met and discussed a reevaluation process. Our expectation is that a student, when a team believes a student is doing really well and may not need that type of service anymore, or that program, like for example, let's say we've said that they have a learning disability, but now they are actually have learned some skills and tasks. Doesn't mean that the learning disability maybe has gone away. It may still be there, but the student has now learned the skills that they need to kind of navigate around or through the challenges. And so now they don't need the level of specially designed instruction that the IEP delivers. The IEP team should be meeting and conducting a reevaluation, a comprehensive evaluation. Our expectation is that we reevaluate and conduct all the evaluations that were necessary to make the child eligible if we are considering an exit. So to Stacy's point of the data, it's not just data that you've collected along the way towards the goals and objectives. An exit means that we've done a full evaluation. Now, there are a few exceptions with that, and that would be like articulation, if they have an IEP for articulation. That type of disorder, that data process with that therapist can be collected with the articulation data that's collected. So there are a few places where the data from the therapist who's been working with that child would meet criteria for that data to be considered. But like all those primary disability categories should have a pretty comprehensive evaluation for exiting that service.
Just one more thing too. We mentioned this in our last session. Parents also have the right to request an independent educational evaluation. Mm-hmm. We would, we use a lot of acronyms, so it's IEE. If they disagree with the evaluation results that we have, or anything that they want to request, that they can make that request, and that would come to the district level for consideration and determination. But it's also important to know if we do that and an outside evaluator completes those evaluations at public expense, those results would go back to a team for review and consideration, but that IEP team still is responsible for determining eligibility and if the student's still eligible. So I think sometimes parents think, well, if I get the outside evaluation, that kind of reverses the decision. And it doesn't work that way. That data, those new reports and evaluations go back to the team to go through those IEP processes.
Thank you very much. And there's a question here about missing services. And Dr. Bell, you touched on this, but this question for Stacy and Wendy says, if my child has missed services, what is the process for my child for receiving compensatory services?
Well, let me kick that off with, if a child misses services because they are not at school, they're ill, whatever reason, they don't come to school that day, we do not make up services when a child misses services. We would, if a child is missing services because something has happened, either with the staff member, let's say there's been a vacancy, a prolonged illness, in which case there was not a substitute, or over periods of time, our job would be to collect all of the information, assess how much service time has been missed, and determine whether or not there is in fact a pattern, which is kind of what policy and procedures guides us, that we can establish that there was a pattern of disruption of services that would constitute compensatory. So at the point where there's a question of that, then usually the facilitators are talking with their respective director. We are getting, and we would be collecting the information and then looking in at kind of investigating that case a little bit more. And then would make a determination from our office if in fact an offer for compensatory services was indicated. Stacy, anything else to offer?
Thank you.
Nope.
Okay, Ms. Porter.
Yes. So what happens if a parent and the IEP team reaches an impasse? on whether a service should be provided or not.
Yeah, if the team doesn't have consensus.
Correct.
So that is the purpose of why there is a particular role, a member of the IEP team that's known as the local education agency representative, the LEA representative. So what does that mean? Local education agency rep. Well, we are the local, Durham Public Schools is a local agency. And so the representative in an IEP team in Durham Public Schools should either be one of the administrators that is in the role of an administrator in the school, or would be the facilitator. And the reason for that is because we have trained facilitators to do that, and or administrators are the ones in charge of the buildings and can make those decisions and are kind of charged with that. Now, if there is an impasse and truly a decision cannot reach consensus, and it's not a matter of taking a break and reconvening and coming back and reaching consensus, it's truly not going to meet consensus, then at that point, the person who serves as the LEA representative on that team is charged with taking into consideration all that has been shared in the course of that meeting and making a decision. So it doesn't come down to a vote. It's not a 4-3 split kind of thing. It does come down to the LEA representative is charged with making the final decision.
Wendy, this question is for you, but I'm going to ask Tracy to weigh in as well, because Tracy, you mentioned what you wish you would have known, that it was a piece of information was shared with you about the process. And the question is, how can parents be better informed of the evaluation process? And so then I'd like to bring Tracy in to just talk about maybe what you wish you would have known when your child was placed in the EC program. So Wendy, if you'll kick us off with that, how can parents be better informed of the evaluation process?
In my former, actually always life, I'm a school psychologist by training. So I was a key person involved in the evaluations of students. So at the meeting where the team is discussing evaluations, you should see people like school psychologists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, who would be able to speak to what evaluations they're going to conduct and why. Typically from there, like if it's an initial evaluation, this is the first time you're going through it. What happens is we cannot, and this is usually said at meetings, but if not, I want parents to hear loud and clear, it should be said, we cannot proceed with starting those evaluations until a team receives the written consent to evaluate. And there is a document, a form that is generated at the conclusion of the meeting. If everybody agrees, yes, we should go forward with the evaluation, that the parent must sign and sanction, yes, I'm authorizing this evaluation to take place. And the document lists all the evaluations that would have been discussed in the meeting as to what would be evaluated. Once that is made back available, right now those are being transmitted through our Adobe electronic signature platform so that parents can sign it electronically, it stamps it, and it comes back. Once we have that back in our hands in our system, then that means the evaluation can commence. And what does that mean? It usually means that we make sure that the first things that are get done are the vision and hearing screenings. So the speech therapist is going to screen the hearing, and usually the nurse or someone else trained at the school level to do the vision screenings will do that. We can also utilize a parent, if a parent provides that with us from their pediatrician and it is within the past year, we can use the data from their pediatrician. We just need to get the information on our form, and which would go for hearing as well. At that point, kind of we get released, if you will. So then as a school psychologist and the speech therapist and the occupational therapist, we're all going to need to do our individual evaluations. And so we are going to be pulling on that student during their school day to conduct those evaluations. I know it was always my goal to try and pull them at times that were less academic, but I'm going to say to all the families out there, where are the places kids don't want to leave? They don't want to leave their specials classrooms. They love to go to art. They love the music. They don't want to they want to be in PE. So, I also had to balance finding times where I had good spirit from them, right? Because I wanted to get optimal results. So the process is done during the school day. It can take, depending on how much needs to be done and how the length of time a child can tolerate, that can take anywhere from 2, 3, or maybe 4 sessions, depending on what's happening. School psychologist is probably going to be doing observations in the classroom. I tended to go do observations before I pulled the student. So the student didn't necessarily know I was there to see them. Once they met me, they knew me, right? So, but all that happens. And again, we are driven by a timeline. So depending on when the referral date was, let's say a parent asks for the evaluation, but the team doesn't meet for 2 weeks, the timeline began ticking. Our 90 days began ticking when the parent made that request to us. So we have 90 days to hold that referral meeting, get the consent, do the evaluations, come back together, review all those results, and make a determination before that 90th day. So it is our goal, and I want to say this really out there for parents, is we are working hard with our evaluators to say to them, your reports need to be getting out to families prior to those meetings. But ultimately, we would want families to have an opportunity to meet with those evaluators to actually go through the results outside of the actual IEP meeting. We would love for, and I did that on several occasions, where it was just the parents and me going through my psychological evaluation. It's a way for it to be more intimate. You know, those IEP meetings can get big and a lot of people, and it can feel uncomfortable sometimes for a parent, especially when a parent is new in that. We don't want them to feel that way, but I understand where that comes from. So it is our goal that those evaluators hopefully will be able to get an opportunity to get together and go through those results in more detail before all the other IEP team members are at the table. And then at the IEP meeting, it would be, more than likely be more of a summary at that point for all the rest of the team members instead of the details, if that has already been explained. That's in a nutshell. I think the only other thing I would add on that is, along the way, there's often parts of the evaluations that parents need to complete as well. We ask for things like a social developmental history. We also have tools, rating scales. They might be rating scales to look at behavior. They might be rating scales to look at characteristics related to autism. They could be rating scales to look at a student's daily living skills. Could be a number of things, but there's definitely pieces we want input on those scales from parents, as well as usually the primary teacher. And so we are going to ask, some parents want them sent home and they'll do them and send them right back. Some parents may need a second copy, and so we have to send those again. Some parents need to say, hey, I really need somebody to sit down and go through this with me. It's just a lot. I don't get it. And that's okay. And I would tell you, as a psychologist, I would much rather hear a parent say to me, I don't get what this is really asking me. Can you sit with me and can we find a time to talk it through? Because that's how we're going to get more valid and reliable information than if you just circle something because you think you know what it's me asking you. So that is my one parting comment on that. And I'll let Ms. Hawkins speak to her part of that.
Thanks, Wendy. I was just going to add, so for my younger two, we came into the DPS EC program kind of different. So for my second grader, he was diagnosed through the EC program. So we went through early intervention with Durham County, and then they kind of passed the baton to DPS once he turned 3 to have him evaluated for autism. So we receive our autism diagnosis through Durham Public Schools. For my soon-to-be 6-year-old, we went a different route. So he received his autism diagnosis through Teach. And just as Wendy was saying, it was really helpful for us to be able to kind of share some observations and data that Teach already had. I think as parents, we complete a number of assessments, and at one point they just seem to be asking all the same thing. So one good thing that we learned is to keep a template of document or a template of questions. So you can kind of cut and paste, and there may be some areas of the question that you just need to update based on the child's development and progress. But that was really good within that evaluation, because it is, I want to say like 3 hours. Is it not, Wendy? It's like a 3-hour evaluation when like come in the beginning into the program. And just
pre-K.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Wendy,
Wendy,
about the pre-K evaluation.
Yes. So the
Yes.
pre-K, and then when just my second grader received that evaluation, it was about 3 hours long as well, where it was the observations, and then I was doing a questionnaire. And one thing I wish I would have known that we learned second time going around is just really trust the process, right? It's a long process. There are going to be things within that 3-hour time block that you know that your child can do, but in that environment, they just may not be willing to or ready, right? I mean, this is a new environment. They don't know the people there. It's a lot of variables that are going into, you know, how your child performs that day, right? So I think that's where it's really handy for the parent to make sure you share as much data and information that you already have from previous assessments with the IEP team or the evaluation team, so that it really helps them in really kind of putting together their plan for the IEP. I think that was very beneficial to us, even being able to go in and just saying, like, would you be able to observe my child within his current school setting, so you can see how he is performing in this school setting, because it's going to be a little different within a room with no windows, one door, and he doesn't know anyone there. So I would say really, as the parent, really ask the questions, because you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. And I always say you have not because you ask not. So like really ask to see what are the options and opportunities there for your child during that evaluation. The other thing I was going to add is towards the end of the evaluation, I really like the question. Now you're kind of drained and tired at the end of the 3 hours. But the question that I really liked from both situations that we had was, what is it that you want us to know about your child that we have not been able to learn during this time? And I would say that is really the opportunity for the parent to really describe your child and give them more of a visual of your child and all of his or her strengths and things that they can do, to really kind of help them come off that page for that IEP team. I think our treatment teams, they read a number of IEPs a day. So it's really beneficial to really help them understand your child and give them a better visual and understanding of your child's abilities.
Tracy, while you're still on, would you say that the evaluation process was helpful for you?
Very helpful. I would say it was extremely helpful. The only thing I would add is understand that you have to be flexible even with the plan that comes up, right? So I felt very confident going into my son's kindergarten year because of the plan. I felt like it was a really strong plan. And we had to make adjustments quick, fast, and in a hurry, and be okay with knowing that you may have to come back to the table and make some adjustments. But again, realize that you as the parent, you really do hold that key to bring the team together when it's necessary and make updates within the IEP when it's also necessary.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't think we have any other questions, but what I would like to do is kind of wrap up, and ask each of you on this panel, because this is a very intense situation, just being a parent, being an educator, someone who is committed, totally committed to your child, to children. So why don't you share, for the benefit of the viewers and the listeners, how you practice self-care? Because in order to really address and take care of our children, we have to take care of ourselves. So Tracy, let's start with you. Sleep, maybe?
I know. I was say, I don't know if I'm the best. I know what I should be doing. So right now, our youngest is kind of going through waking up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and staying up for the rest of the day. So sleep is, one of those things that is very, very helpful and necessary. Just,
Yes.
a little deprived right now. But I would say give yourself the grace, the love, and the patience that we are really wanting others to provide to our kids. Give that to yourself. Understand that it is a journey and it is not a sprint. And you've got to be flexible and fluid, and keep the focus on that of your child. I think if you're able to do those things, I think it kind of helps with your ability to really handle the stress that kind of comes along with some of the IEP processes and the ups and the downs. But just kind of trying to really keep that as a focus, and that the team is really coming together for the betterment of your child and really wanting to see your child progress. So that's probably what I would add.
Great advice. So you know what to do. Stacy, how about you?
That's loaded. So I usually so when breaks come up, like spring break, and I always make sure I take time to disconnect, and that could just be spending time with my grandbabies, because they don't want anything from me. They just want me to just be there, right? No one's asking me for anything. But I also take self-care is working with my team, being honest with my team when I need help from my team, just being able to just say, hey, Dr. Bell, hey, Wendy, like, how would you handle this situation? To me, that's self-care, and knowing that, and we're a group of 4, but we operate as a group of 20, right? We are very skilled. And like Wendy said, we do a lot of things together. So I think that we all take care of each other that way. And we know when it's time for one to have a break, we're there to support. And so I think it works personally and professionally. That's how I handle my self-care.
Thank you so much. You said you work like 20, but I think it's more like 20,000. Thank you all for what you do. Wendy, how about you?
The question of self-care, I went, what does that look like? Because, whatever the clock ends at 5, I think as you talked about it, we're here now, but our days don't end at 5. Our days end at about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, because there is too much to do in the length of the day. But I do try and actually squeeze in for myself a little massage here and there. That is kind of my big thing, and I do try and make that happen as soon as I can find an appointment. And I think the other thing that I would add, as far as, I don't know if I'd call it advice, but conscious discipline is an amazing program philosophy is really what it is. And out of that, one of the tenets is presuming positive intent. And so for all the families, for anywhere, whether it's feel like you're fighting in the battle, whether it's for your child, whether it's with an employee, whatever, I think most people do try to act in the best interest of things. I think they do try and put their best foot forward. And as we have all learned over the past 2 years and going through, we don't know what people are living with and what they're going through. And so sometimes people wear some emotions on their sleeves more than others. And so I think sometimes things are more raw for people. So I would ask, along with that kind of grace kind of thing, I think I would ask for folks to assume that there's positive intent on questions or decisions, and that it's not meant to slight anyone or to deflect from a child's needs. So I think certainly asking questions is absolutely 100% appropriate, and asking the why around something is never a bad thing. So I would encourage all of that.
Sounds like giving each other grace, including yourself. Dr. Bell, how about you round us out?
Yeah, this could be a horrible response in terms of self-care, but it's probably not even so. Professional self-care for me is what's worked for me is always staying true to my why. like every day I go to work with this amazing team, I know what we're doing in Durham Public Schools is always about the child, hands down. It's never a question, that is our focus every single day, and just being transparent and honest, and not being the politician, but keeping it about like being real with teams and families and trying to find solutions. Like that's what gives us, I think, the strength and power to be able to do this work, is feeling helpful and supportive and doing good things for kids. And like my colleague said, working with amazing people who have the same exact commitment and values. And I loved what Wendy also said about the why. Asking why, like, why are we doing this? How does this benefit the student? And encouraging parents to do the same, like ask questions. There's no bad question. There's no stupid question. You ask whoever you need to get the answers that you need to understand and to be able to be a strong participant in your child's educational process.
Thank you so very much to this panel of experts. We appreciate what you've brought to the listeners and the viewers tonight. We do have another webinar, and I'm going to let Ms. Porter bring us parting words and share information and details about the third webinar. Ms. Porter?
Yes, thanks, Crystal. And thanks to this wonderful panel, DPS EC team, and to our parent representative, Tracy Hawkins. Thank you for taking time from your voice tonight to be with us. We really appreciate you. I've been trying to get Tracy a couple of times, and we finally were able to make the connection here. So thank you for taking the time. I wanted to add a couple comments here just about this process. I think the other thing parents should do is continue to get to know their IEP teams, get to know their facilitators, get to know their therapists, build a relationship with those folks. I know that takes time, but I think that would help. That helps in the process. You can email them, and they are willing to assist you in the process. And sometimes you may not agree, but you agree to disagree, but you have an opportunity to build that relationship. So I really wanted parents to understand that, and just like anything that we do, we need to build those relationships. And Tracy, thanks for bringing that back out again about grace and that this is a journey, because that's what our first parent representative said in the first session. And I think our parents continually need to understand we have a lot of pressures and things that are going on and lots of moving parts, and we just need to give ourselves grace. When you have a kid with disabilities or a kid that may have multiple disabilities as mine, you just gotta give yourself that opportunity for some grace. You're not going to get it all right. And I want our parents to understand, and I'm sure they know that, but just to hear someone else say that over and over again, it makes parents understand you're not the only one out here that is kind of experiencing this same type of feeling on a day-to-day basis. And it's a journey. I'm a proud supporter of the March of Dimes, and because my baby was born preterm, and one thing I say all the time is, this is our journey. We are not sprinting. Every day is different. I'm proud of the accomplishments that my child makes on a day-to-day basis, whether they're small to some. We embrace those. And so parents, I want them to embrace those opportunities and those good times. And lastly, when Crystal, you asked me, I just want anyone that's watching to know that our last session will be on April the 27th from 12 noon to 1 p.m. And that really is going to be talking about transitions between grades and post-secondary transitions, because, again, our audience, we don't know it all. We need information. And so we're trying to bring this information to you to help during all of your transitions that your child may have. So we thank each of you tonight, and look forward to having you each back on the 27th, 12 noon, same location, same format. And we really appreciate this team tonight. Thank you all for joining us.